Take that off!
Judge Harold Whitmore's voice cracked across the federal courtroom like a gavel striking stone. The woman standing before him wore a faded olive military field jacket over dark navy blue emergency room scrubs. The jacket looked older than it should have. One shoulder was permanently scorched. The cuffs had been stitched by hand more than once. He wanted it off before she took a single step toward the witness stand. Claire Donovan didn't argue. She simply stood the way soldiers stand, still, balanced, waiting. The judge leaned forward. "I won't repeat myself. Remove the jacket." Claire's eyes never left him. "I'd prefer to keep it on, Your Honor. You don't get preferences in my courtroom." The room fell silent. Two court officers started walking toward her. Claire slowly reached for the zipper. The jacket slipped just enough to expose part of a faded patch sewn onto her shoulder. Only a few worn letters could still be read. P.H.A. Nothing more. Outside the courtroom, an elderly Navy SEAL Admiral stopped walking. His breathing caught. For 3 long seconds, he stared through the partially open courtroom door. Then, almost too quietly for anyone beside him to hear, he whispered, "That can't be." He turned toward the courtroom. Inside, the judge was already ordering the officers forward. What Judge Whitmore didn't know is that the woman standing in front of him hadn't spent years hiding that jacket because she was ashamed of it. She had spent years hiding it because of what it reminded other people of. And in less than 5 minutes, one forgotten military call sign would stop a federal courtroom, silence a judge, and force one of the highest-ranking Navy officers in the country to do something no one inside that room would ever forget. If you enjoy powerful military stories about courage, sacrifice, and ordinary people carrying extraordinary histories, subscribe to Guardian Stories. New stories every week. 3 weeks before Judge Harold Whitmore ordered Claire Donovan to remove the military jacket she hadn't taken off in years, the emergency department at Fort Liberty Army Medical Center was already running out of beds. The automatic doors never stopped opening. Ambulances arrived one after another. Army medics pushed stretchers through the trauma entrance while helicopters circled overhead, waiting for clearance to land on the rooftop pad. Inside Trauma Bay 3, Claire was finishing chest compressions on a young infantry sergeant when another patient rolled through the next set of doors. No one asked if she was tired. There wasn't time. She had been working for 34 straight hours. A convoy accident during a live-fire training exercise had overwhelmed the hospital before dawn, and every available doctor, nurse, and medic had been pulled into the emergency department. Most people slowed down after 20 hours. Claire seemed to become calmer. She moved through the chaos with deliberate precision, speaking only when she needed to. Pressure's dropping. Prepare 2 units of O-negative. Hold compressions. Now. Her voice never rose. It never had to. People listened because she never wasted words. By late morning, the final trauma patient was wheeled upstairs to surgery. For the first time since sunrise, the emergency department breathed. Claire removed her gloves and looked at the clock. 11:43 a.m. She had 45 minutes to reach the federal courthouse downtown. She hadn't planned on wearing her military jacket. She hadn't planned on going straight from the hospital at all. But Mason Brooks had already waited 3 weeks for this hearing. He couldn't wait another day. Claire walked to the staff locker room without telling anyone where she was going. Inside her locker hung an old olive green field jacket. The fabric had faded from years of sun and rain. One shoulder still carried a dark burn mark that no dry cleaner had ever managed to remove. The cuffs had been repaired by hand. Near the right shoulder, beneath a strip of worn Velcro, sat an old stitched patch. Most of the lettering had faded. Only the first few characters remained easy to recognize. Claire looked at it for several seconds, then quietly slid the jacket on. Not because it matched her scrubs, not because it looked professional, Because after everything that had happened, walking into a courtroom without it somehow felt harder than wearing it. 8 months earlier, Mason Brooks had met Claire at a veterans trauma recovery program held every Thursday evening in the basement of a community center across town. Neither of them had spoken much. Most of the people there introduced themselves by rank, deployment, or injury. Claire never did. Mason never asked. During one meeting, Claire absent-mindedly rotated her left wrist, trying to ease the nerve pain that always returned when she was exhausted. Without saying a word, Mason quietly placed a cold bottle of water beside her chair before walking away. No questions, no sympathy, no awkward conversation, just understanding. From that day on, they never needed many words. Some people built friendships through conversation. They built trust through silence. 3 days earlier, Mason had called her for the first time outside the support group. His voice was steady but tired. "Claire, I need someone who'll tell the truth." She didn't ask what had happened. She simply answered, "I'll be there." She locked her locker, picked up her car keys, and walked toward the parking garage, completely unaware that before the day was over, the old jacket resting on her shoulders would become the center of a courtroom battle no one saw coming. Mason Brooks wasn't a man who frightened easily. He had spent 12 years in the Army, 3 overseas deployments, more nights sleeping under open skies than beneath a roof. But the phone call he made to Claire 3 days earlier had taken him nearly an hour to work up the courage to place. Not because he was afraid she would refuse, because he hated asking anyone for help. It had started on a rainy Thursday evening. Mason was walking back to his truck after leaving the Veterans Community Center when he heard a woman scream. Not a loud scream, a restrained one. The kind made by someone who already knew screaming louder would only make things worse. He stopped. The sound came from the narrow service alley behind a row of restaurants. Mason turned the corner. 3 men had trapped a young waitress against a brick wall. One held her purse, another had one hand over her mouth, the third was pressing the tip of a folding knife against her side. Everything after that happened in less than a minute. Mason didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he moved. The first man hit the ground before he understood someone had entered the alley. The second lunged. Mason redirected the attack, sending him shoulder first into a dumpster hard enough to dislocate the joint. The third swung the knife wildly. Mason stepped inside the attack, struck once, and the knife clattered across the pavement. The fight ended almost as quickly as it had begun. 2 men were unconscious. The third, Trevor Langston, collapsed against the wall. His jaw had been shattered when he struck the corner of a concrete loading dock. Blood poured into his airway. The waitress stared. "Mister, I think he's dying." Mason looked down. She was right. Without hesitation, he dropped beside the man who had attacked him. He pulled a disposable pen from his pocket, snapped it apart with his hands, and improvised an airway to keep Trevor from suffocating before paramedics arrived. The waitress stared at him. "You just saved him." Mason didn't answer. He simply kept Trevor breathing until the ambulance arrived. 3 days later, everything changed. The knife had disappeared from the police evidence log. Security camera footage from the restaurant had somehow gone missing. The waitress, Paige Moreno, called Mason in tears. "They came to my apartment." "Who?" "2 men. They said I should think very carefully before telling the court what really happened." Mason already knew who had sent them. Trevor Langston's father, Harrison Langston, a billionaire defense contractor whose name appeared on hospital wings, university buildings, and political campaign donations across the state. By the end of the week, the story had completely changed. According to the official report, there had been no knife, no attempted robbery, no assault, only an unstable military veteran who had violently attacked 3 unarmed young men. Every news station repeated the same version. Every newspaper quoted the same police statement. Mason stopped watching television. He knew exactly how this ended. Until one person called him. "Claire, I've read every report." There was a long silence. Finally, Mason asked, "Do you believe me?" Claire didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked one question. "When you opened his airway, why?" Mason sounded confused. "He would have died." "He was trying to kill you." "I know." Another pause. Then Claire quietly said, "That's exactly why I believe you." 3 days later, she agreed to appear as his character witness. She had no idea that the only thing standing between her testimony and the truth was the old military jacket hanging inside her locker. By the time Claire Donovan parked outside the San Diego Federal Courthouse, she had been awake for almost 36 hours. She switched off the engine but didn't get out immediately. For a few seconds, she simply rested both hands on the steering wheel. Not because she was nervous, because she was trying to leave the hospital behind. The sounds of cardiac monitors, helicopter rotors, the voices of frightened families. None of them belonged inside a courtroom. She took one slow breath, picked up the folder containing Mason Brooks's case notes, and stepped out of the car. The courthouse rose above the street like it had been built to intimidate. Tall marble columns, bronze doors polished by decades of footsteps. Inside, every voice seemed quieter than it needed to be. Every movement felt measured. Every hallway reminded people that decisions here changed lives. Courtroom 7B was already in session. Claire pushed open the heavy wooden door just enough to slip inside. Every head turned. She noticed it immediately. The lawyers, the jurors, the spectators, even the court reporter paused for a second. To them, she looked completely out of place. Dark blue emergency room scrubs still stained from the morning's trauma cases, hair tied back in the practical knot of someone who hadn't looked in a mirror since yesterday. An old olive green military field jacket resting over her shoulders. She wasn't dressed for court, she was dressed for saving lives. At the defense table, Mason looked up. Relief crossed his face, followed immediately by guilt. He hadn't wanted her to come straight from work. He knew what 36-hour shifts felt like. Judge Harold Whitmore adjusted his glasses. He had spent 22 years on the federal bench, long enough to believe he could judge a person's discipline before they ever spoke. His eyes stopped on Claire's jacket, then on the dried blood near one sleeve. His expression hardened. He lifted one hand. "Stop right there." Claire stopped walking. The courtroom became quiet. The judge looked at Claire for several long seconds before speaking again. "State your name." "Lieutenant Claire Donovan, Your Honor." "You've come directly from work?" "Yes, sir." He glanced down at her clothing again. "That much is obvious." A few quiet laughs escaped from the gallery. Claire ignored them. The judge leaned forward. "This courtroom has standards." His voice echoed across the room. "You are about to testify under oath. I expect witnesses to show proper respect for these proceedings." Claire nodded politely. "I understand." His eyes settled once more on the jacket. "What I don't understand is why you're wearing military outerwear over hospital scrubs." Claire answered honestly. "I came directly from the emergency department. I didn't have time to change." "Then perhaps," the judge paused, "you should have made time." Silence filled the room. Claire said nothing. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. "That jacket," he pointed directly at it, "it has no place in my courtroom." Claire's fingers instinctively tightened around the folder she was carrying. She already knew where this conversation was going. So did Mason. From the defense table, he slowly looked down, as if he could wish he could prevent what was about to happen. Judge Whitmore's voice became sharper. "I'll ask you once." His finger remained fixed on the jacket. "Take it off." The entire courtroom waited for Claire's answer. Claire looked at Judge Harold Whitmore without the slightest trace of anger. "I'd prefer to keep it on, Your Honor." The courtroom became unnaturally quiet. Judge Whitmore folded his hands. "This isn't a request." "I understand." "Then remove it." Claire took a slow breath. "I can't explain why, but I'm respectfully asking the court to allow me to testify as I am." A few people in the gallery exchanged puzzled looks. Someone whispered, "It's only a jacket." Judge Whitmore's patience began to disappear. "The dignity of this courtroom isn't optional. You will comply." At the defense table, Mason Brooks slowly lifted his eyes. He already knew what was hidden beneath that jacket. Not because Claire had ever shown him. She hadn't. Not because she'd ever spoken about it. She never had. He knew because she'd worn long sleeves through the hottest weeks of summer. Because she'd quietly declined every veteran's banquet that required formal attire. Because whenever anyone asked about her military service, she simply changed the subject. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't do this for me." Claire understood immediately. She answered with the faintest smile, one that only Mason noticed. Judge Whitmore struck the gavel. "Court officers, escort the witness and assist her in complying with the court's order." The two federal court officers stepped forward. Neither appeared eager. Claire didn't retreat. She didn't raise her hands. She simply became perfectly still, the kind of stillness learned in places where panic only made bad situations worse. As the officers stopped within arm's reach, Claire spoke softly. "Please, don't touch me." There was nothing threatening in her voice, nothing emotional, only quiet certainty. Both officers stopped instinctively. One slowly lowered his hands. The other glanced toward the judge. Judge Whitmore frowned. "What exactly are you waiting for?" Neither officer answered. Instead, the judge's attention drifted back toward Claire's shoulder. During the exchange, the zipper had slipped down only an inch. A small section of an old embroidered patch had become visible. Most of the stitching had faded with time. Only a few letters remained. P.H.A. Judge Whitmore gave a dismissive smile. "Some old military nickname. No wonder you're so attached to it." The words carried through the courtroom and beyond it. The heavy oak door behind Claire had never sealed properly. A narrow gap remained between the frame and the latch, just enough sound to escape into the hallway. Outside, Admiral Nathan Barrett had been waiting for a meeting with federal investigators. His aide was reviewing briefing papers beside him. Barrett wasn't listening. Then, the judge's voice drifted through the cracked door. Old military nickname. P.H.A. Barrett stopped walking. The color slowly drained from his face. His aide noticed immediately. "Sir?" The Admiral didn't answer. For several seconds, he simply stared at the courtroom door. 30 years in naval special warfare had trained him to trust instinct. And at that moment, every instinct told him the same impossible thing. It couldn't be. Not after 4 years. Not here. His hand slowly closed around the brass handle. Inside the courtroom, Judge Whitmore was drawing breath to repeat his order. The courtroom door suddenly opened. Every head turned. Admiral Nathan Barrett stepped inside. His eyes ignored the judge, ignored the lawyers, ignored the jury. They stopped only on Claire Donovan. His voice was barely above a whisper, almost as though he were afraid saying the words aloud would make them disappear. Phantom 4. The courtroom froze. The silence inside courtroom 7B felt heavier than any argument. Judge Whitmore looked from the Admiral to Claire, searching for an explanation that wasn't coming. Finally, he spoke. "Admiral, do you know this witness?" Nathan Barrett didn't answer immediately. He continued looking at Claire as though confirming she was real. Then he nodded once. "I know the call sign." The courtroom exchanged confused glances. "The call sign?" the judge repeated. Barrett slowly walked toward Claire. Every step echoed across the marble floor. He stopped several feet away, close enough to see the faded stitching on the shoulder patch. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he quietly asked, "May I?" Claire understood exactly what he meant. After a brief hesitation, she nodded. Without a word, she slowly pulled the zipper the rest of the way down. The jacket slipped from her shoulders. Several people gasped. Neither arm looked the way healthy skin should. Old burn grafts stretched from her shoulders to her elbows. Thin surgical scars crossed one another in every direction. Near her right shoulder, the faded patch finally became fully visible. Phantom 4. The embroidered letters had nearly disappeared with time, but they were still there. Admiral Barrett closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice wasn't addressing the courtroom. It sounded like a man remembering someone he'd been searching for. 4 years ago, my SEAL team was trapped in the mountains of Yemen. The extraction helicopter couldn't land. The enemy had surrounded the landing zone. The radio was nothing but panic. The courtroom remained perfectly still. Barrett continued. Then one voice came over the channel. Calm, clear, completely unshaken. He looked directly at Claire. She said, "This is Phantom 4. I have 4 casualties. I need 12 minutes. Everyone else stay off this frequency." The Admiral swallowed. "I had no idea who Phantom 4 was. I only knew that my men had stopped answering. I thought we'd already lost them." He looked around the courtroom. "Those 12 minutes were the longest of my career. Every officer in that operations center believed the rescue had failed. But 11 minutes later, he smiled for the first time. I heard her voice again. All 4 are alive. Prepare for extraction." Several jurors leaned forward. Even Judge Whitmore had forgotten about the hearing. Barrett's eyes drifted back to Claire. She carried wounded men one at a time through enemy fire. When the helicopter finally landed, she refused to climb aboard. The pilot had to order her onto the aircraft after every injured operator had already been loaded. Claire quietly looked toward the floor. She had heard this story before. She never enjoyed it. The Admiral continued. The explosion happened less than 30 seconds later. The blast burned both of her arms, nearly took them, but every one of my SEALs survived. The courtroom was completely silent. Barrett looked toward the judge. "You asked why she didn't want to remove that jacket." He paused. "Because every scar beneath it reminds her of the men she almost couldn't bring home." No one spoke. No one could. Then the Admiral did something no one expected. He stepped forward, raised his right hand, and delivered a perfect military salute. "My men have been waiting 4 years to thank the medic they only knew as Phantom 4. His voice became almost a whisper. "And today, I finally know her name." The Admiral's salute remained suspended in the silent courtroom. No one moved. Not the attorneys, not the jurors, not even the court reporter. It was the kind of silence that only arrives when everyone realizes they've misunderstood someone completely. Judge Harold Whitmore slowly removed his glasses. For the first time in 22 years on the federal bench, he had no idea what to say. Claire quietly lowered her eyes. "Permission to stand down, Admiral." Nathan Barrett smiled faintly. "You never needed my permission, Lieutenant." She returned the smallest nod. Then she reached for the old military jacket resting on the witness rail before she could put it back on. Judge Whitmore spoke. "Lieutenant Donovan," his voice sounded different now, quieter. "You may testify exactly as you are." Claire looked at him, then calmly walked to the witness stand. She didn't mention Yemen, she didn't mention the SEALs, she didn't mention Phantom 4. Instead, she looked directly at the jury. "My name is Lieutenant Claire Donovan. I've served as an Army trauma nurse and combat medic. I've treated victims of assaults, shootings, explosions, vehicle crashes, and combat injuries for nearly 15 years. She paused. "I was asked one question. Did Mason Brooks act like a violent man?" She turned toward Mason. "The answer is no." The prosecutor immediately stood. "Objection. Opinion?" Claire nodded. "Then I'll give facts." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Claire opened the medical file she had carried from the hospital. When Trevor Langston arrived at the emergency department, he wasn't dying because someone attacked him. He was dying because blood had blocked his airway. Claire looked toward the jury. The person who prevented that wasn't a paramedic. It wasn't a police officer. It was Mason Brooks. Several jurors exchanged surprised looks. Claire continued. "He improvised an airway using the barrel of a plastic pen. That procedure requires training and, more importantly," she paused, "it requires choosing to save the life of the man who had just tried to kill you." The courtroom became silent again. Claire looked directly at the prosecutor. "Violent offenders don't secure airways. They don't kneel beside injured attackers. They don't remain on scene until paramedics arrive. They leave." Mason Brooks stayed. The prosecutor slowly sat down. For the first time, he had nothing prepared. Then, a chair scraped across the courtroom floor. Everyone turned. Paige Moreno stood. Her hands trembled. She looked toward Judge Whitmore. "I need to change my statement." The courtroom held its breath. "They threatened me. They said if I told the truth, I'd lose my job." Tears filled her eyes. "There was a knife. Mason saved me. And after he stopped them, he saved Trevor too." She pointed toward Harrison Langston. "They sent people to my apartment. They told me to stay quiet." Every eye shifted toward Harrison. His attorney leaned over immediately. "We're done." Harrison whispered angrily. "Sit down." His attorney shook his head. "No, we've already lost." Judge Whitmore struck the gavel. His voice carried through the courtroom. "The witness's statement will be entered into the record." He looked toward the prosecutor. "Given the testimony presented today, the court finds probable cause that material evidence may have been concealed." He turned toward Mason. "All charges against Mr. Brooks are dismissed pending immediate review." Mason closed his eyes, not in celebration, in relief. Months of uncertainty disappeared in a single sentence. Judge Whitmore finally looked back at Claire. There was no authority left in his expression, only honesty. "Lieutenant, when you entered this courtroom, I judged you by your appearance. I was wrong." Claire simply nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." Claire picked up the faded military jacket, carefully slipped it back over her shoulders, covering every scar once again. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the stone steps. Admiral Barrett was waiting. As Claire walked toward him, he stood. Without hesitation, he saluted once more. This time, Claire returned it, perfectly. The Admiral smiled. "For 4 years, I wondered who Phantom 4 really was." Claire glanced down at the worn patch, then quietly said, "I'm just a nurse." Barrett said, "No. You are the reason 4 families got their sons back." Claire smiled gently, then turned toward the city. She disappeared into the crowd exactly the way she'd lived since the war, without seeking recognition, without asking for thanks, carrying the same faded jacket and the same quiet strength. Some heroes wear medals where everyone can see them. Others hide their greatest sacrifices beneath an old jacket, hoping the world never asks about the scars. But the truth has a way of finding its voice, and sometimes all it takes is one forgotten call sign to remind the world what real courage looks like.